This is the Economic Club of Florida, a distinguished platform for discussion of the major national issues of the day.
Good afternoon. I know that there are people still eating, but this is our first live and virtual program, and you have to remember there are people at home that are on their computers getting ready to watch, and we don't want them to watch blue screen for 10 minutes while we eat. So we're going to go ahead and get started. And welcome to our 528th in our series of Distinguished Speaker Programs. I'm Bill Moore. I have the privilege of serving as your club president. And today we're extremely excited to be back in person. The Alumni Center is still closed, so we decided to do it here at the Governor's Club since it was open. And I'm glad that many of y'all decided to come out, and hope that you feel safe. For those of you at home, thank you for joining us again. We're excited to have our speaker today, the Honorable Laurel Lee, Florida Secretary of State, to discuss cybersecurity in the upcoming election in Florida. And again, we thought it would be a good idea to have the in-person meeting today, but each time we try something new, we have to reinvent ourselves as the format changes. These changes take practice and preparation to ensure a seamless program is delivered to all of you. All of the past meetings have been successful due to the countless work from our chair, Cindy O'Connell, who affectionately I have dubbed our executive producer. I'll go off script to say that those who help put these virtual meetings on know that Cindy is a great executive producer. She makes us practice. And people say, "Oh, Bill, it looks so professional." I said, "That's because of our executive producer." I want to turn the microphone over now to Cindy to introduce the work of the board for the last several months. Cindy.
Thank you all. I'm so glad to be here with all of you today to see so many smiling faces. And we look forward to the next meetings or subsequent meetings where we can have more of our colleagues together. While our lives have been on physical lockdown for several months, your board of directors and your executive committee have been at work to find new ways to deliver on the mission of this true business organization founded in 1977. So as you know, on May 6th, we brought the Economic Club of Florida a new virtual format for meetings in order to provide you sustained value and speaker presentations that would be out of our reach if the speaker had a mandatory part in traveling to Tallahassee to see us. Beginning in late 2019, your club began the process of a brand refresh. This process was led by Sachs Media Group. It was comprised of research on similar clubs, aspirational work on what we could provide our community, and finally the development of communication tools to make those aspirations a reality. The Economic Club of Florida's website will receive an upgrade to match the virtual connect that through which we all mostly communicate these days, and you can see that in several weeks. And a new identifier or logo that perhaps will last us another 43 years, as shown behind me today. As a member of the Economic Club of Florida, you will see other communication tools roll out soon. As the organization strives to educate, engage, and empower our community through world-class and topical speakers of our day, much like the speaker we will hear from shortly. Several individuals should be recognized for their outstanding contributions and leadership. First, your executive committee and board. Of course, the steady leadership of former Chair Carol Dadisman, immediate past Chair Ben Watkins, both who had the confidence in us and this project in 2019 when it actually began development. Our executive committee members, your president, Bill Moore, vice president, John Bradley, your secretary, Barney Bishop, your treasurer, Lo Bilby. Each of these individuals have done more than their expected share of Zoom meetings with me and of work to ensure this organization's continued operation. But one individual on our executive team has gone beyond just a few Zoom calls. And his participation took a whole nother level because of his work ethic and his attention to detail. He organized a committee of board members that's actively engaged in every part of our new brand refresh, and that individual, along with his committee, is Barney Bishop. Barney, I want to publicly recognize your efforts and dedication to doing the right thing all the time and taking on with earnest the responsibilities you agreed to. We thank you. I'd also like to thank his committee members, Marion Hoffman, past chair Dominic Calabro, Daria Abak, as well as board members Katrina Roll, Jim Murdaugh, Bill Gunner, Charles Frazier, and Marjorie Turnbull, who all participated in this process. Thank you for staying the course with this organization and for your individual commitment to further the knowledge and the access to Tallahassee to the very best thought leadership available in our world. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Ms. Executive Producer. Is my hair okay? The format from our past few meetings has been very successful, and we'll continue with the format today. Club member Barney Bishop will lead a question and answer following the speaker's remarks. Also, we will be taking questions received online from our members. Be sure to mark your calendars for our next program on July 16th. We will have the president of the Atlanta Federal Reserve Bank, Raphael Bostic. The meeting will be in our virtual go-to-meeting format. Also look out for Echo newsletters to keep you up to date on future speakers. I'd like to thank our sustaining members. And if you're a sustaining member that's in the audience, if you would, please stand. Thanks again for the sustaining members who provide us additional financial support, especially during these difficult times that we are all faced with. Now I'd like to introduce Barney Bishop. Barney is a strategic public affairs consultant and the immediate past president and CEO of Associated Industries of Florida. Barney is also the former executive director of the Florida Democratic Party. I didn't realize that. Barney's wife, Shelby, is the executive assistant to our speaker today, the Florida Secretary of State. Barney will now introduce our distinguished speaker.
Good afternoon. Laurel Lee, our speaker today, is Florida's 36th Secretary of State as established by the 1838 state constitution. Florida's Secretary of State was originally elected directly by the people and was a member of the Florida cabinet for 160 years until our constitution was changed in 1998 to make the office appointed, and it has been so since 2002. She serves as the state's chief of elections, chief cultural officer, state protocol officer, and the head of the Department of State. Born into a military family, her father was a U.S. Air Force officer before eventually retiring as a major general. And so growing up, she lived all around the country, but especially enjoyed her time in Okaloosa County. Secretary Lee is a double Gator, having received both her bachelor's degree and her Juris Doctor degree from the University of Florida, where she was a member of Florida Blue Key and was inducted into the UF Hall of Fame in 1999. She began her legal career as a young lawyer in the Tampa office of Carlton Fields Law Firm, where she practiced both antitrust and complex business litigation. She became a judicial law clerk to U.S. District Judge James S. Moody, Jr., and served as an assistant federal public defender in the Middle District of Florida. She then switched from defending to prosecuting federal offenders as an assistant U.S. attorney, where she gained valuable evidence in a variety of key assignments, including as lead prosecutor for the Child Prostitution Task Force, the coordinator for the Interagency Bankruptcy Fraud Working Group, and serving as the coordinator for the Violence Against Women Act. In 2013, she was appointed to the 13th Judicial Circuit as a circuit judge by then Governor Rick Scott, and she was reelected the following year. During her time as a circuit judge, she presided over the Circuit Civil Division, the Civil Appellate Division, and the Domestic Relations Division. She was also appointed by the Florida Supreme Court Steering Committee on Family and Children in the Courts and the Florida Supreme Court's Commission on Trial Court Performance and Accountability. She was appointed by Governor Ron DeSantis in February of 2019 to join his administration as Secretary of State. She is married to former Senate President and current Senator from the 20th District, Tom Lee, and they have 3 children, Reagan, Brandon, and Faith. I asked the Secretary of State to share with me a story about her that most people wouldn't really know. And she told me about the time that she was introduced to Tom Lee by Tom Pepin, who is the Anheuser-Busch distributor in Tampa. She says they first met at a cocktail party and talked a bit, and that was really it. A week or so later, Tom Pepin called her up and told her that Tom Lee wanted to have a date with her. And would she be willing to go out with him? She said yes. They met for the first date, and then it turned out to have many subsequent dates. It was only months later that in talking amongst themselves that they learned that Tom Pepin had also called Laurel Lee and told her that Tom Lee wanted to have a date with her. So it turned out to be a match made in heaven. Today, it's my honor to present to you, and let's give her a warm Economic Club welcome, Secretary of State Laurel Lee.
Well, thank you, Barney, for that kind introduction. And it is true that my husband and I actually dated for several months, both believing that the other had initiated the relationship. Before one night over a dinner, we realized that, in fact, we'd had quite an astute matchmaker. So it is such a pleasure to get to be here with all of you today. It is wonderful to have the opportunity to both see all of you who are here in person and also connect with those who are participating with us virtually. This is a wonderful format in these times, and I am just very glad to have the opportunity to get to be your speaker. There really is no greater public service than what you all do to support, promote, and invest in your community, to be the civic and community leaders that you are. So it is a privilege to be with this particular group. I look around this room and I recognize enough of the faces of folks that I've had the opportunity to get to know here in Tallahassee to immediately understand that this is the type of group for which I would enjoy being a member. This is an excellent crowd, and I'm glad to get to be here with you today. So one thing that I'll begin with today is to share just a bit about the Department of State's functions and the things that we do in the state of Florida. It's quite a diverse set of things. Barney mentioned several of them. So I always, when I have a chance to speak with leaders in the community, like to share a little bit about what we do across the board. And then I will spend some time discussing what we are doing to prepare for and be ready for Florida's 2020 elections. So the Department of State has a number of really interesting and unique responsibilities. Our mission is far-reaching. In some, it is to improve the quality of life for all Floridians. And we do that in each of our respective divisions in different ways. To begin, we have the Division of Historical Resources, and this division is responsible for protecting, preserving, and sharing Florida's unique history with the public. We employ a number of terrestrial and underwater archaeologists in that division. They actually go out and find precious artifacts and help preserve important historic sites. We have conservators who, when we receive those artifacts, are experts in making sure that they are maintained in a way that will preserve them for generations to come. And then we share those artifacts through a number of our own museums. We have 4 museums here in the Tallahassee area, and then also with other facilities throughout the state, so that this collection of artifacts that we have right now, it totals 3.5 million artifacts. And we want to ensure that this collection that really reflect our state's unique and extraordinary history are shared with the public around our state. So that is the fundamental work of our Division of Historical Resources. And I do believe that division, along with our 4 museums here in Tallahassee, truly make this one of the most unique cities in our state as an opportunity to truly learn about and immerse in our state's history. We have the Division of Corporations, which of course is where we go to make sure that our corporations, trademarks, and judgment and federal tax liens are recorded and preserved. One of the exciting things we're working on this year is actually a modernization of the Division of Corporations. We're working on a new program to update and improve the user interface and functionality of our Division of Corporations website. We hope that when that is fully implemented next year, it will make it an easier interface for users and also promote the security of data and information that is filed there. We also have the Division of Cultural Affairs, and this is where we support arts and culture agencies that are located throughout our state. We're fortunate to administer a large grants program so that we can find, locate, and support arts and culture, museums, and performing arts centers and organizations around the state that enhance our rich history with Florida's incredible arts and performing arts. This is one of the really critical ways that we improve that quality of life, by ensuring that that richness and diversity is represented and supported in all of our communities. We have the Division of Libraries and Information Services. Here we manage the state's library and archives, and again help administer a large grants program for public libraries around the state to ensure that they are supported in receiving the information and infrastructure that they need. Now, if you have not been to your local library recently, I highly commend it to you. Our libraries have evolved remarkably over time to not only continue being an incredible resource for research and technology, but also to provide programming and opportunities that are specific to the needs of their communities. We have libraries now that promote health and wellness programs, financial literacy. We even have libraries where you can check out a fishing pole to take fishing. So I highly encourage you to explore the kinds of opportunities that might be available at your local libraries. So with that, I will turn to what is our best known role, and certainly the role that often receives the most public attention, and that is the Division of Elections and my particular role as our state's Chief Election Officer. And I will spend some time today sharing with you what we do in that work, and also what specifically we are doing to ensure that we are ready for election 2020. Of course, at the end of this presentation, I hope that we can move into a dialogue, and I will welcome the questions from all of you that you may have, and also those of us who are joining us virtually would love to hear your questions and areas of interest as well. So fair and accurate elections are the cornerstone of any democracy, and ensuring that our elections are secure and accurate, and that the public can and should have confidence in the integrity of our elections is the top priority of the Department of State. We have been working on this as a priority, and also the most important thing that we can be doing in advance of the 2020 presidential election. And so today I want to leave you with a greater understanding of the investment that we have made in our elections, the preparations that are underway, and also I'll share with you some things related to how we have responded to the coronavirus and how that is affecting our work and our preparations. So I'll start by sharing a bit about the role of the Department of State in the elections process and the role of the local supervisors of elections. We are very fortunate here in Leon County to have a superb supervisor of election in Mark Early. He is one of our most experienced and excellent supervisors. So I am very glad not only to get to work with him in my capacity in elections, but also to be one of his voters here in Leon County. So I'm really pleased, and I'll share a little bit more about the ways in which we work together as we go forward. So you'll hear a lot about election security during these next few minutes, but I'll also touch on the concept of misinformation and disinformation, because that is one of the other things that we all as a nation will be confronting as we prepare. So the Secretary of State's office and the Division of Elections, we are responsible for a number of things by statute. That includes ensuring compliance with election laws, promoting public participation in elections, providing uniform standards for the implementation of voter registration laws, providing technical assistance to supervisors of elections, providing voter education to the public, and also creating and maintaining a statewide voter registration database. We also tabulate the certified results of the election. The supervisors of election are responsible for much of what you see on election day. The logistics of ensuring that voting systems are procured, that they are placed in precincts, that there is appropriate signage and election workers. All of the logistics of the operation of what you see on election day is being done by your local supervisors of elections. Now, of course, the supervisors of elections are also independently elected constitutional officers. With the exception of one county, Miami, the supervisor of election there is appointed. And so they are an incredible foundation for the success of all of our elections. The reason why I believe it's important to note that framework at the outset of this discussion is because until recently, the Department of State and the supervisors of election largely managed the security of their networks and their infrastructure separately. The Department of State provided financial support. We would provide guidance by way of best practices and protocols that we would advise should be adhered to in every county. But fundamentally, maintenance of those networks was being addressed at a local level. That all began to change in 2019 when Governor Ron DeSantis directed me to engage in a statewide review of our elections infrastructure. To do that, we had to cooperate in a very different and new way with all of the local elections officials around our state. It became clear early that if we wanted this process to be as effective and as thorough as we really needed it to be, that we needed to ensure we had consistent information from every county, and that we shouldn't rely simply on self-reporting for the strength of a network and the strength of a particular local environment. So we developed what we refer to as the Joint Election Security Initiative. We have an acronym, of course. We are a government agency, and our acronym for that process and that program is JESSE. So we developed this JESSE initiative, and I'm so pleased to tell you that when we went to the supervisors of election and proposed this idea, our vision for how can we really take a good, strong look at where we stand and where we need to get, every single one of them, every single county across our state joined with us and partnered in this election security initiative. So a bit about what we did there. The first thing we did was go out to each county. The Department of State's cybersecurity experts went out to each county and conducted an elections-specific risk assessment on their networks, their elections infrastructure, and their physical security. So in all 67 counties, we did that. So for the first time in Florida's history, we developed a true picture of where we stand, a baseline of from our starting place of where we needed to get. So we had that picture. Then we moved to step 2, which was to work with these counties to address or mitigate any of the vulnerabilities that were identified in advance of 2020. Now, as you might imagine, this process involved a significant amount of trust and collaboration by the supervisors. You all are business people. Many of you are responsible for maintaining the security and integrity of a network of your own in some capacity. To allow a third party, even one who's engaged in your industry and hoping to collaborate with you, to actually come in and run this type of assessment involved an incredible level of trust and cooperation. So it was an incredible accomplishment, really, I believe, that is due and predicated on the notion that we all share this common goal of wanting Florida to be in the strongest possible posture as we go into 2020 and future elections. So what have we done since? One thing that's important to know is that we have invested millions in our cyber infrastructure statewide over the last several years. This has come in the form of both dollars from our federal government and also dollars appropriated by our state legislature. We have modernized and updated everything from software to hardware to firewalls and all of the things that are associated with maintaining secure networks. We have also engaged in a process of training. One thing that we learned early on is that if we can invest these millions of dollars and we can have the best tools and the best hardware, but if we don't train our employees to learn about things like social engineering and phishing emails, that one employee clicks the wrong link and we're still made vulnerable despite these significant investments. So we've also engaged in a very elaborate plan of training, not only for every employee at the Department of State, but also providing those resources and those training out in the field at every local elections office. We have 5 full-time employees who we refer to as cyber navigators. And those full-time employees are the ones who are used not for maintaining our internal network, but for going out throughout the state and helping assist all of the localities and counties with their needs. As you might imagine, our counties are very differently situated. Some of our large urban counties have large budgets, they have large staffs, they include internal, in-house IT professionals. Some of them have multi-person IT staffs inside their offices. Others are in the opposite situation, where their budget may be small, their staff is very small. They don't have the ability to retain an on-site full-time IT coordinator. So those resources and having access to IT experts and cybersecurity experts who can deploy out across our state has really been an important tool in ensuring that every single county in our state can reach a minimum baseline of security. Another important thing to note on the subject of training is that we are not in this fight alone. We partner very closely with our law enforcement agencies, FDLE, the FBI, the Department of Homeland Security, even the NSA are all engaged with us in this effort to secure our elections. So they too provide very useful and valuable opportunities for training and also helping to shore up any vulnerabilities that are identified. They work together to make sure that we are advised of any potential threats, any emerging threats, which helps us in turn be able to respond to those threats quickly and appropriately. So next up, that's some of what we've been doing to work on specifically on cyber infrastructure and elections infrastructure. But I also want to spend a moment talking about our voting systems, how our voting systems work, and the parts of those systems that are designed to also ensure the integrity of the process and the accuracy of our vote tabulation system. So the first thing that's always important to note on this subject is that Florida uses hand-marked paper ballots. So much of what you hear out there in a discussion of elections and election security relates to states who may not do that, who may have a different type of voting system. In Florida, we use hand-marked paper ballots. So quite clearly, you can't hack paper. And it's an important part of our election security plan because should there ever be a challenge or a problem, we retain a 100% paper marked copy of every ballot. So that's an important thing to know as you consider election security. There's one exception in law that allows voters with disabilities the option to vote on accessible devices. So just to keep that in perspective, like touchscreen machines, but to keep that in perspective, even this option will require a paper record starting in 2020. And in the 2018 general election, out of more than 8 million ballots that were cast, there were 83 ballots cast by touchscreen by voters who needed that accommodation. So our voting equipment is also a very important part of what we do to ensure election integrity. And the modernization of voting equipment has been an important priority for the department and also for the local elections officials. And all of them have gone through a process where they either updated their existing equipment or replaced it with new voting machines. So at this point, statewide, all supervisors have gone through a process of modernizing their voting equipment. So to be used in any election in Florida, voting systems must be approved by the Department of State. So we have a process that tests and reviews any voting system before it can be procured and deployed in the context of an election. Another interesting thing to note is that prior to any election, the supervisor of election conducts what is called logic and accuracy testing. That is essentially a pre-election audit where a supervisor will actually use the machine, run ballots through, check to ensure that the machine operated correctly, tabulated correctly. Those are also open to the public. So if any of you or anyone you know has questions about what we do to ensure that these machines are operating correctly and tabulating correctly, you can actually go and attend these pre-election audits in your supervisors of elections offices. It's also a great way to get to meet your supervisor and ask any questions that you may have about their operation or what they're doing. Another thing, we also conduct post-election audits, the same thing. After the election has occurred, the same equipment goes through a post-election audit to be sure that it did in fact function correctly during the election process. It's also important to keep in mind that during the vote tabulation process, voting machines are never connected to the internet. So there's not an opportunity during the voting process for there to be any sort of interference from a network or otherwise on that tabulation process. So when you hear a national discussion about elections and about election security, know that Florida is in fact following so many best practices with respect to hand-marked paper ballots, pre and post-election audits, and making sure that those tabulation machines are not connected to the internet during the voting process. So those are some of the important things that we are doing to protect our election against any sort of hacking or intrusion attempt. But there's an equally insidious challenge we face that I also want to mention, and that is the concept of misinformation and disinformation. So misinformation, of course, is misleading information, while disinformation is false information deliberately or covertly spreaded around. And this is something that we fully anticipate that we have seen already and will continue to see in the context of elections. Now, when we talk about foreign interference in elections more generally, it's important to distinguish what exactly we're discussing, because if we're talking about cyber intrusion or we're talking about misinformation or disinformation, what we do to prepare for and respond for those things is quite distinct. So here I will take just a moment and talk about the misinformation and disinformation. So what we've already covered what we've done to strengthen our infrastructure on the first part. Misinformation and disinformation is also an insidious problem for us. So for example, if a group spreads incorrect information about how or where to vote, how to request a vote by mail ballot, or where your precinct is located, that can have the effect of creating voter confusion, undermining public confidence in our election. A classic example would be social media content suggesting to a user that election day has been rescheduled to Wednesday, or your precinct has been moved across town. Anything that is going to create a barrier to that voter having access to correct and easily actionable information about how and where to vote. So what we are doing to work on in that regard goes back to the very significant partnerships I mentioned earlier with our state and federal law enforcement. We are in constant communication with the FBI, Homeland Security, the National Association of Secretaries of State, and FDLE to try to stay on top of where this misinformation may be coming from. And each of those groups, all of us, both independently and in a joint effort, are going to be working very hard over the next 6 months to communicate to the public that the source for election information should come from your election officials, to be a critical consumer of information. And if you're seeing something in your Facebook feed that appears to be giving you instructions or new information about what to do or how to register, to check that against information from your elections officials to ensure its accuracy before you allow it to inform your decisions about what to do next. So you'll see a lot, hopefully. Our intention is that all of you will see a lot about these public information campaigns in the coming months. The closer we get to the election, the more that you will see us working very hard to be sure we're communicating those messages out to the public. One just interesting note, another thing that we hear from our law enforcement partners that we can expect for this coming election is something they refer to as deep fake videos. And that is a use of technology using some sort of artificial intelligence technology where they can take, for example, the recording of a person giving remarks and actually change the words that are spoken in a very realistic way, so that it appears to be a person you know and recognize saying things or doing things that that person in fact never said or did. So if it wasn't already hard enough to figure out what you think about issues or candidates or who you might want to vote for, that's definitely something to keep an eye out for and understand that we hope we don't see it, but that's what we hear is something that may be on the table for part of our upcoming election cycle. So this is also where voters and organizations like you can get involved and really help us get in the best possible position that we can be in coming into the election, because each of you is a leader in your business and in your community, and you too can be part of the message on trusted sources, trusted voices. Go to your election officials. Those are all things that you can do. If you're interested, go to that pre-election audit and see how it looks. Get engaged with your process. If you're interested, you can work as an election worker. But most importantly of all, go out and vote. We want to see turnout in Florida, despite any challenges that we may be facing right now as a state. We hope to see record turnout and participation in our democracy for this election. Let's see. So I want to also leave you with a little bit about coronavirus specifically, and then I will open up to questions that you may have about these or any topics. I welcome questions about elections. Also, any of the other things we have going on at the Department of State, I'm happy to discuss. So in addition to the efforts that we have taken to harden our networks and prepare for cyber threats, we've also been taking measures to protect voters and election workers and prepare for this new challenge that is before us with the coronavirus existing in our state. So since the beginning of the outbreak, we've been trying to follow the guidance from the CDC. As it evolves, we've tried to follow it step by step. And in Florida, one thing that we're very fortunate to have, we already have here multiple options that voters can choose to cast their ballot. We have early voting, election day voting, and we also have vote by mail. And one thing that is distinct about our state that is certainly not true in all states is that any voter can request a vote by mail ballot. Any voter, for any reason, can request and receive a vote by mail ballot. In many states, vote by mail is not something, some don't have it as an option at all. Others have it as an option only in very limited circumstances that may affect a voter. And here we have what we refer to as no excuse required vote by mail, which means any voter who wishes to can choose to vote that way. So relative to many other states, we were actually very well positioned to confront the type of challenges that we see now, because we do have all of those options available for voters to choose what is the best for them and for their families. So whatever voting method is preferred, of course, you may only select one, and all ballots must be received by 7 p.m. on the day of the election. We're also working closely with supervisors of elections to ensure that they have access to any supplies that they might need, PPE, masks, hand sanitizers, and things of that nature, so that they have access to the things that they might need to equip precincts and polling locations with what the supplies that they need. We have, of course, requested CARES Act dollars. There are CARES Act dollars that are devoted specifically to elections. We have asked for our share, our Florida share of that money, so that we can pass it along to the supervisors to help defray any special expenses that are being incurred in association with accommodating coronavirus concerns as we go forward. Let's see what else I've got. Oh, yes, of course. This is well timed, because just last week, Governor DeSantis entered an executive order that relates to elections that I believe will be very valuable in helping ensure that supervisors have the tools that they need to prepare for these elections in these unique times. Among other things, Governor DeSantis has made a very broad and significant incentive to all state workers to go out and work as election workers. He's encouraged superintendents of schools to close, to allow schools and communities to serve as polling locations. And he has also directed the Department of Emergency Management to facilitate ensuring that supervisors have access to all of the PPE that they need. So those are, I think, some very important things that hopefully will go a long way to ensuring that we have those additional options available to supervisors as they go forward. So one thing I must say, because I've shared a lot with you about what we're doing to prepare, particularly on a cybersecurity front, I always like to conclude by acknowledging that while we have made significant investments and we have made extraordinary progress, this is a constantly evolving and never-ending threat. So this is, for us, the concept of election security is a race for which there is no finish line. We have to continue to remain ever vigilant, continue to monitor, continue to invest in our cybersecurity and our elections infrastructure every day. Every single day, there are foreign and domestic actors who attempt to penetrate our networks. Every single day, we defend against those threats. So part of our task is not just to share with you what we have done thus far and the progress that we've made, but also to assure you that we will not rest. This is a fight we will continue to fight every day going forward. And let's see, with that, yep, we will do everything possible. We're very proud of the partnerships that we've developed with our supervisors, and we're very proud of their willingness to join with us and work toward what we believe is a significant improvement and strengthening of our election system. So with that, I thank you again for having me and would welcome any questions or discussion that you may have.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. And thank you for your nonpartisan leadership and service. Very important. Thank you for your lifelong commitment to public service, public leader, as well as your husband, Congressman, a wonderful, great leader. The question I really have is about the mail now. This is some discussion that some say it's not very accurate or didn't very accurate. I personally log and I like to know who vote correctly on the day. But I'm not careful that but if you talk a little bit about how we, Florida, need to make sure that we kind of make sure the voting process is actually fun.
Absolutely. And I think that's a really important question because, again, we've seen some national level dialogue about the vote by mail process that has potentially raised some concern about the efficacy and fix that guy. There we go. That has potentially raised some concerns about the efficacy or security of the process. And there, what I would say is this. The way we're fortunate in Florida to have been doing this for a while now. So our process in Florida by statute is one that is very carefully considered and includes some important checks and balances to ensure that a ballot that is sent from a supervisors of election office is going to a registered voter who requested that ballot. And then when it comes back, that we know it's from that voter. So for example, one of the things we do here is a supervisor must receive a request prior to sending out a vote by mail ballot. And that's an important way to make sure that there aren't ballots going out there to incorrect addresses or to folks who didn't request them. So the first step is that a voter needs to make that request. It's very easy to make that request. It can be done online. It can be done in person. It can be done via phone. But a voter has to make that request. The second thing we require in Florida that's important is it must be signed. So when that ballot comes back to the supervisors of elections office, that signature is compared to a signature that we have on file. So, and there is a cure process. If your ballot comes in and the signature doesn't look like it's right, the supervisor will contact that voter to make sure the voter has an opportunity to come in and say, yes, that is in fact my ballot. Make sure that it gets counted. But those are important safeguards in determining that this is getting into the right hands and it's coming back to the right hands. And so our state, I believe, is very well situated to have a secure and effective vote by mail process. So some of what you're hearing, those generalized concerns, I believe may be more applicable to other states who aren't as experienced with administering vote by mail as part of an election and don't have some of those safeguards in place to ensure the accuracy of those ballots.
I've got three questions that came online. One is, why does the supervisor of elections in Miami-Dade, and when are they appointed and not?
Oh my. Well, what time are we at? We're at 12:56 and I've received a question I would have to look into to let you know. I don't recall exactly why Miami-Dade is distinct, but I do know that that is our one supervisor of election who is appointed as opposed to being independently elected.
The second question, what are you doing to ensure that a cyber attack not make a legitimate voter ineligible to vote or to make other changes that would affect voter eligibility?
Sure. So that question relates specifically to how do we maintain and how do we keep secure our voter registration database? And that is part of our overall cybersecurity plan. Everything that we've been doing that I described earlier that relates to investing millions in firewalls and hardware and software and all of that is part of the umbrella that is protecting not only our internal operations, but also that database, which is part of them. So we have a multi-pronged approach to ensuring the security of that data that includes making sure we have up-to-date and appropriate protections in place surrounding that data, and that also anybody who can access that data is properly trained on how to do it, and that there are a limited number of people who can in fact do so. So that's something that we're very sensitive to and is one of the things that we protect the most closely.
Could you please address the misinformation on voter voting a little bit more?
Sure. So one of the things that is always a concern is that a voter might receive information and believe, for example, that they've requested a vote by mail ballot or get misinformation about how to fill it out properly. And so that is one of the pieces that we want to ensure. First of all, what I just explained about why a voter can feel good, why a voter can feel confident in Florida, that if they exercise that option, we want to be sure that that message isn't just delivered in this room. We want that message to be delivered to every Floridian. This is what we do. This is how we can ensure that your ballot is secure, that your ballot is counted. So we're going to be working very hard to be communicating that accurate information so that if a voter hears something different, they pause and they stop and they consider it, that they become a more discerning consumer too, and know where to go to get information from their local supervisor or my office. Yes.
What authority do you have to tell the 67 supervisors of elections what to do? Where does it start?
That is a great question. So, we have legal authority to ensure that elections are conducted uniformly, that supervisors are following the election code, and there are various tools that one could deploy if it were necessary. If there were a supervisor who weren't discharging their statutory responsibilities appropriately, there are various tools that can be used to ensure that they do. So I'm fortunate that during my tenure, it has been my observation that all of them are doing what they're supposed to be doing. So we have not yet been in a situation where we had a concern that there was a supervisor who needed to be addressed. But of course, there are remedies, in the form of, the courts or ultimately the governor's authority to suspend a supervisor if there were somebody who were not discharging their statutory responsibilities. But I have a very high degree of confidence in the 67 supervisors we have in place right now, that they are all working incredibly hard to discharge their duties faithfully and accurately. Other questions? Very good. Yes, sir. Thank you. Oh, we did. All right. Well, I will tell you what, I am happy to stay afterwards. If there are others who had questions or thoughts that they didn't get to share, I am happy to stay afterwards and talk with any of you all. I'll say one final thing, and that is that I'm very excited about. We will be contacting every single potentially eligible but unregistered voter before the presidential election to encourage every Floridian who is eligible to register and vote. We want to see the greatest participation in this election that we've ever seen in our state. So with that, I thank you all so much for having me here.
Thank you for that very informative presentation. And on behalf of the board and the membership of the club, we'd like to present this token of appreciation. It's signed not by the author, by the club officers, but thank you. It's a land remembered.
Thank you so much.
And we're sorry to have to cut off questions like that, but we have to remember we've got people at home and we try to stay on time for everybody at home. Remember, our next program will be a go-to-meeting format, July 16th. That will be President of the Atlanta Federal Reserve, Raphael Bostic. And thank you for being here today.
This is the Economic Club of Florida, a distinguished platform for discussion of the major national issues of the day.